The cafeteria of the Galactic Military Academy buzzed with conversation as cadets from dozens of species shared their evening meal. The massive hall could hold 3,000 beings, and tonight it was nearly full. Towering Vorthic warriors with their blue-scaled skin and razor-sharp claws dominated one section, their booming laughter echoing off the metal walls. Sleek Zephyrian pilots with their silver eyes and gossamer wings clustered around tables near the viewing ports, their melodic voices creating an almost musical backdrop dot in the far corner. Away from the main crowd sat a human girl who barely looked old enough to be here. Sarah Chung was small even by human standards, standing just 5 feet tall with a slight build that made her look fragile next to the other cadets. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her dark eyes were focused on the tactical manual she was reading while she ate. She had been at the academy for 6 months, and in all that time, she had spoken perhaps 50 words to anyone outside of required responses to instructors. "Look at the little human," sneered Thaxon, a massive Vorthak whose scales gleamed with combat honors earned in border skirmishes. Still hiding behind her books like a frightened child, his companion Zektar clicked his claws against the metal table. "My spawn brother could defeat her in combat, and he is still in the nursery pools. Why do humans even bother applying to warrior academies? They should stick to their merchant ships and peaceful colonies." At a nearby table, a group of Zephyrian flight cadets turned their attention to the conversation. Lirelei, whose wings shimmered with an iridescent blue that marked her as nobility among her people, laughed softly. Perhaps she is here to learn how real warriors fight before she returns to her little farming world. It must be educational for such a primitive species. Sarah's grip tightened slightly on her book, but she did not look up. She had heard variations of these comments every day since arriving. The other species saw humans as weak, soft creatures who had stumbled into space travel through luck rather than skill. Earth's military was considered a joke by most of the galaxy. They had no natural weapons like claws or fangs, no thick armor plating, no wings for aerial superiority. Humans were seen as barely above the servant classes. Commander Vexith, the Kellerian instructor who oversaw the combat training program, strode into the cafeteria. His insectoid frame moved with predatory grace, and his compound eyes seemed to take in everything at once. The noise level dropped as cadets noticed his presence, but conversations continued in more subdued tones. "Attention," his voice carried clearly across the hall without him needing to raise it. "Tomorrow begins the final evaluation period. You will be divided into squads and face increasingly difficult combat scenarios. Those who fail will be returned to their homeworlds with a notation of inadequacy in their permanent records." A murmur ran through the gathered cadets. This was what they had all been training for during their year at the academy. The final evaluations would determine who earned commissions as officers in the Galactic Defense Force and who would spend their lives knowing they were not strong enough to protect their worlds. Thaxon's chest swelled with confidence. Finally, a chance to show these weaklings what real warriors can do. He flexed his claws, each one capable of tearing through standard armor plating. The Vorthic Empire will be well represented. Lirelei's wings fluttered with excitement. The aerial combat simulations will separate the true pilots from the pretenders. Zephyrian superiority in the skies is well documented. Sarah closed her book and gathered her tray. As she stood to leave, Zektar called out loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear. "What about you, little human? Are you excited to finally prove how useless your species is in real combat?" Every eye in the vicinity turned to Sarah. She paused for a moment, her back still turned to the crowd. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but clear. "I'm looking forward to the opportunity to demonstrate what I've learned." "What you've learned?" Thaxon's laughter was harsh. "What could a human possibly learn about warfare from real warriors? Your people fight with projectile weapons from a distance because you are too weak for honorable combat." Sarah turned around slowly, and for just a moment, something flickered in her eyes that made a few of the closer observers uncomfortable. But it was gone so quickly that most dismissed it as a trick of the lighting. "Every species has its strengths," she said simply. Tomorrow we'll see how they match up." As she walked away, the mocking resumed behind her. But if anyone had been paying close attention, they might have noticed that Sarah Chun walked with the balanced stride of someone who knew exactly where every other person in the room was positioned. They might have seen how her seemingly casual glance had cataloged exits, potential weapons, and cover positions. They might have realized that her 6 months of silence had been spent doing something far more valuable than talking dot in her quarters that night. Sarah sat on her narrow bunk and opened a different kind of book. This one was not a standard tactical manual from the Academy Library. It was a collection of historical accounts from Earth, stories of humans who had faced impossible odds and found ways to win. She read about guerrilla fighters who had defeated technologically superior enemies, about soldiers who had held positions against overwhelming force, about ordinary people who had done extraordinary things when everything depended on it. The other cadets saw humans as weak, because they measured strength by the standards of their own species. They looked for scales and claws, for natural armor and inborn weapons. They measured courage by how loudly one could roar or how fiercely one could charge into direct combat. But Sarah had learned something during her time among these proud warrior races. They all fought the same way their ancestors had fought for thousands of years. Honor-bound Vorthak charged straight ahead with claw and fang. Aerial Zephyrians relied on speed and grace in open sky combat. Insectoid Calorians used swarm tactics and overwhelming numbers. Humans did something different. Humans adapted. They studied their enemies, learned their weaknesses, and found ways to win that no one expected. It was not about being stronger or faster. It was about being smarter, more creative, more willing to do whatever it took to protect what mattered. Tomorrow, Sarah thought as she closed the book, they would all get a chance to see what that really meant. The Academy's lights dimmed for the night cycle, and across the dormitories, cadets prepared for sleep. Some sharpened claws or polished scales. Others performed ritual prayers to warrior gods or meditation techniques passed down through generations of fighters. In her small, sparse room, Sarah Chun simply smiled. The morning alarm shrieked through the Academy dormitories at exactly 0600 Standard Time. Cadets from dozens of worlds stirred to life, beginning the routines that would prepare them for the most important day of their military careers. The evaluation halls buzzed with activity as instructors prepared scenarios that would test every aspect of combat training the cadets had received. Sarah Chun was already awake when the alarm sounded. She had been sitting cross-legged on her floor for the past hour, running through mental exercises her grandfather had taught her years ago. He had been a special forces operator during Earth's corporate wars, back when humans were still fighting each other instead of trying to prove themselves worthy of galactic respect. "The mind is the weapon," he had told her when she was barely 10 years old. "Everything else is just tools. A warrior who cannot think clearly under pressure is already dead, no matter how big their claws are." She dressed in the standard Academy combat uniform, checked her equipment one final time, and made her way to the briefing hall. The corridors were filled with nervous energy as hundreds of cadets prepared for evaluation day. Some were boasting loudly about their prowess, while others maintained focused silence. A few were visibly shaking with anxiety. Commander Vexith stood at the front of the massive briefing hall, his compound eyes reflecting the light from dozens of displays showing terrain maps and scenario parameters. Behind him, other instructors from various species monitored holographic displays that would track every movement, every decision, every success and failure of the day ahead. "Cadets," his voice cut through the murmur of conversation like a blade. "Today you will face 7 distinct scenarios designed to test different aspects of combat leadership and tactical thinking. You will be randomly assigned to mixed species squads and given command rotations. Your performance will be measured not just on mission success, but on adaptation, leadership under pressure, and the ability to work with beings whose combat styles differ from your own." The random assignments appeared on the main display. Sarah found herself assigned to Squad 7. Along with Thaxon and Zektar from the Vorthak contingent, 2 Zephyrian pilots, including Lirale, a Calorian named Scrix who specialized in technical warfare, and a crystalline being from the hegemony called Nexus, whose species communicated through harmonic resonance. Thaxon laughed when he saw the assignment. Perfect. The weakest squad gets the weakest human. This will be over quickly. The squad gathered in Preparation Bay 7, where they received their first mission briefing. A holographic display showed a fortified position on a hostile world, surrounded by defensive towers and patrolled by automated sentries. Their objective was to infiltrate the facility, extract valuable intelligence, and escape without triggering the base's self-destruct mechanism. Standard assault pattern, Thaxon declared, automatically assuming command. Zephyrians provide air cover while Vorthak forces punch through the main gate. The others can provide support as needed. Liralay's wings fluttered in agreement. My flight training gives me natural authority over aerial tactics. The approach should focus on speed and overwhelming force. Sarah studied the tactical display quietly. The base's layout showed multiple redundancies, overlapping fields of fire, and sensor networks that would detect any conventional approach long before they reached the objective. A direct assault would trigger every defensive system simultaneously. Has anyone considered the underground approach? She asked quietly. Thaxon's scales darkened with irritation. Underground? Like vermin? Vorthak warriors do not skulk in tunnels. We fight with honor. The honor is in completing the mission, Sarah replied calmly. The base has thermal sensors, motion detectors, and automated weapons covering all aerial and ground approaches. But the intelligence brief mentions old mining tunnels beneath the facility that predate the current security installation. Scrix's antennae twitched with interest. The human raises a valid tactical point. My analysis of the defensive grid shows a 97% probability of detection using conventional assault methods. Probability means nothing to a true warrior, Zektar snarled. We have faced worse odds and prevailed through strength and courage. Sarah pulled up a secondary display showing historical data from similar training scenarios. This exact base layout has been used in 43 previous evaluations. Direct assault has a 12% success rate. Aerial infiltration has achieved 18%. Combined arms approaches reach about 31%. But unconventional entry methods show success rates above 70%. The squad stared at her. It was the most any of them had ever heard her speak at one time. You memorized the historical data? Liralay asked, her melodic voice carrying a note of surprise. I study, Sarah said simply. While others were proving how tough they were in the recreation areas, I was learning how previous teams succeeded or failed. Nexus resonated with a harmonic tone that indicated thoughtful consideration. The crystalline being species valued logic above tradition, and the statistical evidence was compelling. Perhaps the being's mental voice touched each of their minds through its natural telepathic abilities. We should consider the merit of the human's tactical assessment. Thaxon's claws extended unconsciously. You would have us follow the lead of the weakest member of our squad? This is madness. The mission parameters don't give points for fighting style, Sarah pointed out. Only for mission completion. The instructors want to see if we can adapt our thinking and work together despite our differences. If we charge in like berserkers and fail, we all fail together. The preparation timer showed they had 15 minutes before the scenario began. Other squads were finalizing their equipment loadouts and reviewing assault plans that looked remarkably similar to each other. Most were variations on the same theme, direct application of force using each species. Traditional strengths. Sarah opened her tactical manual and began sketching modifications to the base layout, showing how the old tunnel system could provide access points that bypassed the main defensive grid. Her drawings were precise and detailed, marking probable sensor locations, guard rotations, and structural weaknesses that could be exploited. Scrix studied the sketches with growing interest. The human's analysis identifies vulnerabilities that our standard tactical training does not address. If these tunnel estimates are accurate, we could achieve mission objectives with minimal resistance. And if the tunnels have collapsed, or if there are defenses we cannot see from the briefing data? Zektar challenged. Sarah looked up from her notes. Then we adapt. We move to backup plans, we use the information we gather, and we find another way. That's what humans do. We solve problems. Lirelei was beginning to see the logic in the unconventional approach. The aerial reconnaissance could be used to verify tunnel access points rather than direct assault. My flight capabilities would be ideal for rapid scouting missions. The timer reached 5 minutes. Around them, other squads were performing final equipment checks and war cries. Squad 7 was engaged in the most civilized planning discussion any of them had ever experienced in a military setting. Very well, Thaxton said finally, his warrior's pragmatism overcoming his initial skepticism. We will attempt this tunnel approach. But if it fails, we revert to direct assault methods. Sarah nodded. Fair enough. But if we're going to do this, we do it completely. Half measures will get us detected just as quickly as a full frontal attack. As they moved toward the scenario entry point, none of them realized they were about to participate in what would later be studied as a textbook example of human tactical innovation. The quiet girl who had spent 6 months being dismissed as weak was about to show them something that would change how they thought about warfare forever. The scenario simulation materialized around Squad 7 with the disorienting shimmer of advanced holographic technology. They found themselves standing on a rocky plateau, overlooking a fortified compound that looked exactly like the briefing materials. Except now it was real enough to smell the ozone from the defensive energy barriers and hear the mechanical whirring of automated patrol drones. The base stretched across a natural valley, its walls rising 30 meters high and bristling with sensor arrays. Guard towers swept the approaches with searchlights that could blind unprotected eyes, while aerial drones followed predetermined flight patterns that left no gap in surveillance coverage. It was an intimidating sight that had caused many previous squads to hesitate just long enough to be detected by perimeter sensors. Sarah immediately dropped to a crouch behind a boulder, her movements fluid and silent. The others followed her lead, though with varying degrees of stealth. Thaxton's heavy frame made concealment difficult, but he managed to position himself behind adequate cover. Lirelei's natural grace allowed her to find a position that would let her take flight quickly if needed. Perimeter analysis confirms the briefing data, Sarah whispered, studying the base through tactical binoculars. Guard rotation every 12 minutes. Drone patterns cycling every 8 minutes with a 40-second gap in coverage over the northeast approach. That's our window to reach the tunnel entrance. Scrix extended sensory appendages that could detect electronic signatures from considerable distances. Confirmed. The gap in surveillance coverage occurs precisely as the human calculated. However, I detect additional sensors in the tunnel system itself, likely motion-activated. Sarah had expected this complication. Can you override them? Given sufficient time and access to the control nodes, yes. But the process would require approximately 4 minutes of uninterrupted work. Then we create a distraction to buy you that time. Sarah turned to Lirelei. Your aerial reconnaissance showed 3 auxiliary power stations. If one of them went offline, how long would it take base security to respond? The Zephyrian pilot's silver eyes gleamed with understanding. Standard protocol would be to dispatch a maintenance drone first, followed by a security patrol if the drone found evidence of sabotage. Estimated response time would be 6 to 8 minutes. More than enough time. Sarah began sketching a revised plan in the dirt. Nexus, can your harmonic abilities interfere with the power station's resonance frequency from a safe distance? The crystalline being considered this request. Yes, but the interference would be detected as an artificial signal rather than equipment failure. That's even better. It will draw their attention and make them focus on external threats rather than internal infiltration. Sarah looked at each team member in turn. Thaxton, Zektar, I need you two to be our insurance policy. If something goes wrong and we need to fight our way out, you're our heavy assault capability. But until then, you need to trust the stealth approach. This was perhaps the hardest thing she was asking. Vorthak culture prized direct confrontation and viewed elaborate tactics as cowardly. But Thaxton had been watching Sarah's analysis with growing respect. Her tactical planning was more sophisticated than anything he had encountered in traditional Vorthic military education. "The human speaks wisdom," he admitted grudgingly. "We will follow this plan." The team moved into position with a coordination that surprised even Sarah, despite their different combat philosophies. Each species brought unique capabilities that complemented the overall strategy. Liralay's flight allowed rapid reconnaissance and communication between separated team elements. Nexus could detect electronic signals and communications that might indicate they had been discovered. Scrix provided technical expertise that turned obstacles into opportunities. When the next surveillance gap opened, they moved. Sarah led them down a treacherous slope that would have challenged experienced mountaineers, but her small size and careful planning had identified the safest route. The tunnel entrance was exactly where the old mining survey had indicated. Partially concealed by rockfall but still accessible, the tunnel system was a maze of passages, carved by automated mining equipment decades before the military base was constructed. Sarah had memorized the layout from archived geological surveys, but navigating by memory in the dark was still a challenge. She used a small tactical light with a red filter that preserved night vision while providing just enough illumination to avoid fatal falls. "Motion sensors ahead," Scrix reported through their communication link. "I count 4 nodes in a cross pattern designed to detect any movement larger than local wildlife." Sarah studied the sensor placement. "Can you create a feedback loop that makes them think they're detecting each other?" "Ingenious." "Yes, that should work." Scrix extended delicate manipulator tendrils toward the nearest sensor node. "Beginning override sequence now." While Scrix worked, Sarah monitored their communications for any sign that the base had detected their presence. The power station distraction was proceeding perfectly. Security teams were focused on the external threat, running diagnostics and dispatching patrols to check for signs of sabotage or enemy presence. "Override complete," Scrix announced. "We have clear passage to the base sublevel." They emerged from the tunnels into the base's lower maintenance level, a maze of pipes and conduits that served the facility's operational needs. The intelligence target was 3 levels up, in a heavily shielded data center that conventional assault teams would find nearly impossible to reach, but Sarah had studied the bases. Architectural plans with the same intensity she had devoted to everything else. She knew that the maintenance systems provided access routes that bypassed most security measures. Maintenance tunnels were designed for automated repair systems, not human intrusion. But Sarah's small size allowed her to navigate passages that would stop larger beings. "I'll go alone for this part," she told the others. "The target data core is too small for more than one person, and my size gives me the best chance of reaching it undetected." Thaxton's protective instincts rebelled against sending the smallest team member into danger alone. This violates every principle of squad tactics. We do not abandon our comrades. "You're not abandoning me, you're providing security and extraction support." Sarah checked her equipment one final time. "If I'm not back in 15 minutes, or if the base goes to full alert, execute the emergency withdrawal plan. The mission is more important than any individual." She disappeared into a maintenance shaft that barely looked wide enough for a child, leaving the others in a state of uncomfortable tension. They were warriors trained for direct action, and watching their smallest teammate vanish into an impossibly tight space felt like a violation of everything they had been taught about protecting the weak. But Sarah, Jun, was not weak. As she crawled through passages designed for repair drones, she moved with the careful precision of someone who had trained for exactly this kind of infiltration. Her grandfather's lessons echoed in her mind. Reminders that size could be an advantage, if you knew how to use it properly. The data center was exactly where the plans indicated, its walls lined with processing cores that hummed with encrypted information. Sarah connected her extraction device and began the download sequence. 3 minutes to copy the critical intelligence data. 3 minutes during which any mistake could trigger alarms that would bring the entire base down on top of them. 2 minutes in, she heard footsteps in the corridor outside. A routine security patrol, moving according to schedule? Sarah forced herself to remain calm and motionless as the guards passed by, their heavy boots echoing off the metal flooring. The download completed just as the footsteps faded into the distance. Sarah packed her equipment and began the careful journey back through the maintenance system, carrying intelligence that would give their mission a perfect score if they could escape without detection. When she rejoined the others, they looked at her with expressions that ranged from amazement to newfound respect. In less than 20 minutes, the quiet girl had accomplished what most assault teams failed to achieve in hours of fighting. "Extraction route is clear," Lirelei reported from her overwatch position. No indication of heightened security status. They made their way back through the tunnel system and up the rocky slope to their extraction point. As they reached safety, Sarah finally allowed herself to smile. The mission had succeeded not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they had worked together and adapted their tactics to the situation. But this was only the first scenario of 7, and Sarah was just getting started. Word spread quickly through the Academy's evaluation center. Squad 7 had completed their first scenario in record time with 0 casualties and perfect intelligence recovery. The instructors monitoring the exercise had watched in amazement as the team executed a flawless infiltration that bypassed every defense system in the simulation. Other squads were struggling through the same scenario with predictable results. Squad 3 had lost 2 members to automated defenses during a frontal assault. Squad 12 was still trapped in a firefight at the main gate. Squad 1, composed entirely of Vorthak honor warriors, had triggered every alarm in the base and was fighting a desperate retreat. Commander Vexus studied the tactical recordings with interest. In 40 years of military service, he had rarely seen such innovative problem-solving from Academy cadets. The human girl's approach had been methodical, creative, and devastatingly effective. More importantly, she had somehow convinced a squad of proud warriors from different species to follow her unconventional strategy. "Prepare Scenario 2, he ordered his assistant instructors. "I want to see if this was luck or skill." Squad 7 barely had time to rehydrate and check their equipment before the next simulation began. This time they found themselves in an urban environment under siege, with civilian populations trapped in a hostile zone. Their mission was to evacuate non-combatants, while holding off enemy forces long enough for extraction ships to arrive. The scenario was designed to test leadership under pressure and the ability to balance offensive and defensive priorities. Most teams attempted to establish a perimeter and fight holding actions while civilians were evacuated, often resulting in heavy casualties on both sides. Sarah studied the urban landscape with the same analytical approach she had used for the infiltration scenario. The city was a maze of damaged buildings, blocked streets, and potential ambush sites. Enemy forces had superior numbers and knowledge of the terrain. Any conventional defensive strategy would be overwhelmed within minutes. "We're not going to hold a perimeter," she announced to her squad. "We're going to make them chase shadows while we move the civilians through routes they don't expect." Thaxton's confusion was evident. How does one evacuate civilians without establishing secure zones? By making the enemy think they're fighting a much larger force than they actually are. Sarah began marking positions on her tactical display. "Lirelei, I need you to create the illusion of aerial support in multiple locations. Fast passes, weapons fire, but never staying long enough to be engaged. Nexus, can your harmonic abilities simulate communication chatter from units that don't exist?" The crystalline being resonated thoughtfully. "I can generate false communication signatures that would suggest coordination between multiple squads. The enemy would waste time and resources responding to threats that are not present." Sarah's plan was audacious in its simplicity. Instead of trying to outfight superior numbers, they would use misdirection and mobility to create confusion. The enemy would be fighting ghosts while the real squad moves civilians through evacuation routes that bypass the main fighting entirely. "Scrix, I need you to access the city's infrastructure systems. Traffic lights, emergency broadcasts, utility controls. Can you make it look like there's coordinated resistance activity throughout the urban zone?" The Kellerian's mandibles clicked with excitement. Yes, I can trigger emergency protocols, activate civil defense systems, even generate false sensor readings that suggest movement in areas where no one is present. Thaxon and Zektar looked skeptical. This plan required them to split up and operate independently, something that went against every instinct of pack-hunting Vorthek warriors. But they had seen the results of trusting Sarah's tactical thinking in the previous scenario. "What role do we play in this deception?" Thaxon asked. "You're the reality behind the illusion. When the enemy commits forces to investigate false threats, you hit them hard and fast, then disappear before they can respond. Make them think they're facing commando units with supernatural mobility." The scenario began with enemy forces advancing through multiple approach routes toward civilian shelters. Following standard doctrine, they moved in coordinated columns that could provide mutual support and overwhelming firepower. It was exactly what Sarah had expected. Lireley launched immediately, streaking through the urban canyons at maximum speed while firing short bursts that lit up enemy sensors. Before they could respond with anti-aircraft fire, she was gone, appearing seconds later on the opposite side of the combat zone. The enemy began reporting aerial attacks from multiple directions, forcing them to split their attention and anti-air resources. Scrix triggered cascading infrastructure failures that made it appear as though the city itself was fighting back. Traffic control systems began routing imaginary evacuation convoys through sectors where no convoys existed. Emergency broadcasts reported resistance activity in dozens of locations. Utility systems failed and restored themselves in patterns that suggested coordinated sabotage. Nexus generated a symphony of false communications that painted the picture of a well-organized defense force. Enemy intercepted signals suggested squad-level units coordinating complex tactical movements throughout the urban zone. Radio chatter spoke of reinforcements that didn't exist and defensive positions that were elaborate fiction. Meanwhile, Sarah led the civilian evacuation through service tunnels and maintenance corridors that didn't appear on most tactical maps. Her study of urban infrastructure had revealed pathways that connected building complexes without exposing evacuees to street-level combat. The civilians moved in small groups guided by precise timing that kept them ahead of the confusion she was creating when enemy forces finally concentrated on what they thought was a major evacuation route. Thaxon and Zektar struck from unexpected angles. Their natural combat abilities, enhanced by Sarah's timing and positioning, allowed them to inflict devastating casualties before vanishing back into the urban maze. The enemy found themselves fighting smoke and shadows, while the real evacuation proceeded undetected. The simulation ended with full civilian evacuation and minimal friendly casualties. Enemy forces were scattered throughout the urban zone, chasing threats that had never existed while the real objective slipped away unnoticed. In the observation center, Commander Vexith turned to his fellow instructors with an expression of profound interest. 2 scenarios, 2 perfect scores. Either we are witnessing exceptional luck, or this human has tactical abilities that exceed our standard evaluation parameters. The other instructors were reviewing combat footage that showed coordination and innovation far beyond what they expected from Academy cadets. The human girl had not only solved complex tactical problems, she had somehow transformed a diverse group of warriors into a cohesive unit that operated with efficiency that matched veteran Special Forces teams. "Sir," one of the monitoring technicians reported, "the other squads are requesting tactical briefings on Squad 7's methods. They want to know how the humans achieved such results." Vexith considered this request. Standard Academy policy discouraged sharing tactical information between competing squads. But these results were so far beyond normal parameters that they might represent a fundamental advancement in military thinking. Denied. We continue with standard evaluation procedures. I want to see how this human performs when faced with scenarios that cannot be solved through stealth and misdirection. As Squad 7 prepared for their 3rd scenario, Sarah was aware that expectations had changed. The other cadets were watching them now with expressions that mixed respect with confusion. How had the quiet girl who never spoke in class somehow become the leader of the most successful squad in the evaluation? But Sarah knew this was only the beginning. The scenarios would become more difficult, the problems more complex. Eventually, they would face situations that could not be solved through clever tactics and careful planning. When that moment came, she would need to show them something even more fundamental about human nature, the ability to refuse to give up, no matter how impossible the situation became. The third scenario was designed to break squads that relied too heavily on unconventional tactics. Commander Vexith had chosen it specifically to test Squad 7's ability to adapt when stealth and misdirection were impossible. They found themselves on a barren planetary surface with no cover, no infrastructure to exploit, and no civilian complications to provide tactical flexibility. The mission was simple in concept but brutal in execution. A critical supply depot needed to be defended against overwhelming enemy forces for exactly 1 hour until reinforcements arrived. The depot sat in the center of an open plain with nowhere to hide and nowhere to run. It was a scenario that demanded traditional military virtues, courage, discipline, and the willingness to stand firm against impossible odds. Enemy forces approached from 3 directions with numerical superiority of approximately 10 to 1. They had armor support, aerial units, and artillery that could destroy the depot from long range if not engaged directly. Every previous squad that attempted this scenario had fought heroically and died nobly, failing to hold the position for more than 20 minutes. Sarah studied the tactical display with growing concern. This was not a problem that could be solved with clever infiltration routes or elaborate deceptions. The enemy had overwhelming force and clear objectives. They would advance steadily, absorb whatever damage the defenders could inflict, and eventually overrun the position through sheer numbers. Standard defensive doctrine suggests establishing a perimeter and fighting a series of delaying actions, Scrix observed, running calculations on his tactical computer. However, mathematical analysis indicates a 0% probability of mission success using conventional methods. Thaxon and Zektar were examining the supply depot itself, a reinforced bunker complex that offered some protection but could not withstand concentrated bombardment for long. Their warrior instincts appreciated the clarity of this scenario. No tricks, no elaborate schemes. Just honest combat against superior numbers. Finally, a battle worthy of Vorthok honor, Thaxon declared, extending his claws. We will stand here and fight until the last breath leaves our bodies. Our deaths will be songs for future generations. Sarah felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. The Vorthok approach to this scenario was exactly what the instructors expected. Glorious defeat, noble sacrifice, and ultimate failure. It was the kind of thinking that had led to countless military disasters throughout galactic history. We're not going to die here, she said quietly, but with absolute conviction. And we're not going to fail this mission. Liralay's wings fluttered with nervous energy. The mathematics are quite clear. Even if we inflict casualties at a rate of 5 to 1, which would be extraordinary, we lack the resources to maintain defense for the required duration. Then we don't fight a defensive battle. Sarah was studying the supply depot's manifests, looking for something that might change the tactical equation. What exactly are we defending? Nexus accessed the mission database and transmitted the information directly to their minds. The depot contained advanced military equipment being shipped to frontier worlds, including experimental weapon systems that were too dangerous for standard transport. Sarah's eyes lit up as she read through the inventory list. Experimental gravitational mining charges, atmospheric processors, long-range communication amplifiers, and military-grade fabrication units. She looked up at her squad with the first genuine smile any of them had seen from her. We're not defending a supply depot. We're defending a weapons factory. The concept was so audacious that even Thaxon paused in his preparations for glorious death. Explain this strategy. The gravitational mining charges can be reconfigured as area denial weapons. The atmospheric processors can generate concealment clouds that will disrupt enemy targeting systems. The fabrication units can produce additional defensive equipment using raw materials from the mining charges. Sarah was already moving toward the depot's control systems. We don't just defend this position. We turn it into an impregnable fortress. Scrix's technical expertise was crucial for implementing Sarah's vision. While the others established basic perimeter defenses, he worked with the fabrication systems to produce automated defense turrets using components from the experimental equipment. The gravitational charges were reprogrammed to create localized gravity wells that would trap advancing vehicles and disrupt formation movement. The enemy will expect conventional defense patterns, Sarah explained as she directed the placement of improvised obstacles. They'll advance with armor support, suppress our positions with artillery, and overwhelm us with infantry. But what if their armor can't maintain formation because of gravitational anomalies? What if their artillery can't target effectively through atmospheric interference? What if their infantry faces automated defenses that appear out of nowhere? Lirelei used her aerial capabilities to place atmospheric processors in strategic locations that would create a network of concealment clouds. The processors were designed for terraforming operations, but Sarah had realized they could be modified to produce dense particulate clouds that would interfere with optical and electronic targeting systems. This violates every principle of honorable combat, Zektar observed, though his tone carried more curiosity than criticism. We are not warriors facing our enemies in honest battle. We are technicians hiding behind machines. We are soldiers completing our mission, Sarah corrected firmly. Honor comes from success, not from dying in predictable ways. The enemy forces began their advance exactly as tactical doctrine suggested they would. Armored spearheads moved to establish fire superiority while infantry followed in supported formations. Artillery units prepared to provide bombardment support once targets were identified. It was textbook combined arms assault that should have overwhelmed any squad-sized defensive force. Instead, they encountered something unprecedented. The gravitational anomalies disrupted their advance formations, separating armor from infantry support and creating gaps that could be exploited by defenders. The atmospheric interference made target identification nearly impossible, forcing them to advance into cloud banks, where ambush was likely. When they finally reached what should have been effective engagement range, automated defense systems opened fire from positions that had not existed when the battle began. The fabrication units had been working throughout the approach, producing additional turrets and obstacles that changed the tactical situation faster than the enemy could adapt. Sarah coordinated the defense from the depot's command center, using the communication amplifiers to maintain contact with her scattered squad members, while monitoring enemy movements through sensor networks that extended far beyond normal battlefield awareness. She was not just commanding a squad anymore. She was orchestrating a technological symphony that turned a desperate last stand into a masterpiece of defensive warfare. Thaxton found himself fighting a battle unlike anything in Vorthik military tradition. Instead of glorious single combat, he was directing automated systems that multiplied his effectiveness 100-fold. Instead of charging directly at superior enemies, he was using gravitational traps and concealment clouds to isolate individual units that could be defeated in detail. The enemy forces found themselves fighting not just Squad 7, but an entire defensive network that seemed to grow stronger as the battle progressed. Every position they overran was replaced by new defenses that appeared as if by magic. Every tactical advantage they gained was neutralized by technological innovations they had never encountered. After 45 minutes of increasingly desperate assault, the enemy commander made the decision that Sarah had been waiting for. Faced with unacceptable casualties and no clear path to victory, he ordered a tactical withdrawal to reassess the situation. The reinforcements arrived to find Squad 7 in complete control of an enhanced defensive position that looked like it had been built by engineering battalions rather than a 6-person cadet team. The supply depot was not only intact but had been transformed into a fortress that could probably withstand assault by forces 10 times larger than what they had just faced. In the observation center, Commander Vexith was reviewing battle footage with something approaching awe. How long since a squad has successfully completed Scenario 3? 17 months, sir. The previous successful team was composed of veteran Special Forces operators participating in advanced tactical training. Vexith nodded slowly. Prepare Scenario 4, but modify the parameters. Standard testing protocols may not be sufficient to properly evaluate these cadets. As Squad 7 prepared for their next challenge, Sarah was beginning to realize that they were no longer being evaluated as students. They were being tested as something far more significant. And the most difficult challenges still lay ahead. The Academy's senior faculty had assembled in the main observation chamber to witness something unprecedented. Word of Squad 7's performance had spread throughout the institution, and instructors who had trained warriors for decades were gathering to see what the quiet, human girl could accomplish when faced with the Academy's most challenging scenarios. Commander Vexith stood before the assembled faculty with an expression of barely contained excitement. Colleagues, we are about to implement scenario protocols that have never been used on Academy cadets. These tests were designed for elite Special Forces units with years of combat experience. The fourth scenario materialized around Squad 7 as a complex, multi-level facility under siege from internal and external threats. They faced simultaneous challenges. Hostile alien parasites had infected the crew. Enemy forces were attempting to breach the facility from outside, and critical life support systems were failing. The mission required them to coordinate rescue operations, combat operations, and technical repairs while operating under extreme time pressure. Most importantly, command authority was unclear. Each squad member had specific expertise that made them the logical leader for different aspects of the crisis. The scenario was designed to test whether mixed species teams could adapt their leadership structures dynamically or whether they would collapse into chaos when clear hierarchy was absent. Sarah immediately realized that this scenario could not be solved by any single tactical approach. The problems were too diverse and too urgent for traditional command structures. Instead of trying to coordinate everything herself, she made a decision that went against every military training principle she had ever learned. We split command authority, she announced. Scrix, you handle the technical crisis. Life support failure kills everyone, so that's your priority. Thaxon and Zektar, external defense is your responsibility. Lirale, aerial reconnaissance and evacuation coordination. Nexus, internal threat assessment and crew rescue. I'll coordinate information flow and resource allocation. The concept of split command authority was revolutionary. Military doctrine across all known species emphasized clear hierarchy and unified command structure. Battles were won by disciplined units following the orders of competent commanders, not by committees trying to coordinate multiple simultaneous operations. But Sarah had studied military disasters throughout galactic history, and she had noticed a pattern. Most catastrophic failures occurred when rigid command structures prevented adaptation to rapidly changing circumstances. When situations demanded expertise from multiple specializations, traditional hierarchy often became a liability rather than an asset. Scrix immediately took charge of the technical crisis, using his species' natural aptitude for complex engineering problems to trace the cascading failures in the facility's life support systems. His analysis revealed that the problems were not random malfunctions but sabotage designed to create exactly this kind of multi-crisis situation. The damage patterns suggest intelligent opposition, he reported through their communication network. Someone or something wanted us to face all these challenges simultaneously. Thaxon and Zektar coordinated the external defense with the fierce efficiency that made Vorthic warriors legendary throughout the galaxy. But instead of simply fighting as individual berserkers, they adapted Sarah's tactical principles to create overlapping fields of fire and mutual support positions that multiplied their effectiveness. Lirale's aerial capabilities allowed her to maintain oversight of the entire crisis zone while providing rapid Response to emerging threats. Her reconnaissance revealed that the external attackers were not trying to destroy the facility, but to capture it intact, suggesting that whatever they were after was more valuable than the crew or the installation itself. Nexus used harmonic resonance to locate survivors within the facility's maze-like interior while simultaneously mapping the movement patterns of the infected crew members. The alien parasites appeared to be coordinating their attacks, suggesting an intelligence that went beyond simple biological infection. Sarah found herself not commanding the operation but facilitating it, coordinating information flow between team members, who were each operating as autonomous commanders within their areas of expertise. It was a command style that no military academy in the galaxy taught, but it was producing results that exceeded anything traditional command structures had achieved in similar scenarios. The breakthrough came when Nexus detected harmonic patterns in the parasite-controlled crew members that matched frequencies being broadcast from the attacking external forces. The threats are coordinated, the crystalline being reported. External attackers are controlling internal infected personnel through resonance communication. Sarah immediately saw the tactical opportunity. Scrix, can you disrupt the communication frequency as part of your repair work on the facility systems? Yes, but doing so would require rewriting power from defensive systems during the repair process. We would be vulnerable to external assault for approximately 10 minutes. Thaxon, Zektar, can you hold external defenses without power support for 10 minutes? The Vorthic warriors assessed their tactical situation with the cold precision of experienced killers. Possible, but casualties would be high if enemy forces coordinate. A major assault during the blackout period. Then we don't give them the chance to coordinate. Sarah's plan was taking shape with the same methodical precision she had brought to every previous challenge. Lirale, I need you to create a diversion that draws external forces away from the main facility just as power goes down. Nexus, once parasite communication is disrupted, can you guide infected crew members to medical containment areas? Affirmative to both requirements. Came the coordinated response, the plan required. Split-second timing and absolute trust between team members who had learned to operate as specialists rather than subordinates. When Scrix initiated the power rerouting sequence, Lirale immediately launched a solo assault on the external attacker's command position that forced them to commit reserves to defend their leadership. Thaxon and Zektar used the confusion to launch their own assault, striking external positions that had been identified by Lirale's reconnaissance. Without power support for defensive systems, they relied entirely on their natural combat abilities and tactical positioning to achieve objectives that should have required numerical superiority. Nexus guided disoriented crew members to safety, while Scrix restored power and life support systems that had been sabotaged. The parasite-controlled personnel, suddenly cut off from their coordinating intelligence, became confused and vulnerable to containment procedures. The scenario ended with complete mission success. All crew members rescued, all hostile forces eliminated or driven off, all facility systems restored to full operational status. Most importantly, they had achieved these results with zero casualties and minimal resource expenditure. In the observation chamber, the assembled faculty was witnessing something that challenged fundamental assumptions about military command and control. The human girl had not just solved complex tactical problems. She had demonstrated a command philosophy that enabled teams to perform beyond the capabilities of their individual members. Sir, one of the junior instructors approached Commander Vexith with obvious confusion. How do we evaluate performance when traditional command structures have been completely abandoned? Vexith studied the tactical recordings with the intensity of someone trying to understand a new form of warfare. We evaluate results. And these results suggest that everything we thought we knew about leadership may be incomplete. As Squad 7 prepared for their fifth scenario, Sarah was beginning to realize that they were no longer being tested against Academy standards. They were being evaluated as potential examples of something entirely new. The quiet girl who had spent months being dismissed as weak was demonstrating military innovations that could change how warfare was conducted throughout the galaxy, but the most challenging test still awaited. And somewhere in the Academy's planning chambers, instructors were designing scenarios that would push her tactical abilities to their absolute limits. The final 3 scenarios came in rapid succession, each designed to test aspects of leadership and tactical thinking that went beyond standard military evaluation. Commander Vexith and the senior faculty had made a decision that would be debated in military academies for generations. They would push Squad 7 to their absolute limits to see what human tactical innovation could achieve under maximum pressure. Scenario 5 placed them in command of a failing colony under attack by environmental disasters, hostile wildlife, and equipment failures that threatened thousands of civilian lives. Traditional military training provided no framework for coordinating humanitarian relief, scientific research, and combat operations simultaneously. Sarah's solution was to treat the entire colony as a complex system where every problem was connected to every other problem. Instead of prioritizing threats by conventional military logic, she coordinated responses based on cascading effects and resource optimization. The team saved the colony by solving the environmental crisis first, which eliminated the conditions that made wildlife hostile, which freed up resources to repair equipment, which provided tools to establish defensive positions against external threats. It was systems thinking applied to warfare, and it produced results that amazed the observing instructors. Scenario 6 was a diplomatic crisis where they had to negotiate peace between hostile alien species while preventing an all-out war that would devastate multiple star systems. The scenario was designed to test whether warriors could think beyond violence as a solution to conflict. Sarah approached it as an intelligence problem, using her team's diverse capabilities to understand what each species actually needed rather than what they claimed to want. Scrix analyzed communication patterns to identify underlying fears driving the conflict. Nexus used harmonic resonance to detect emotional states that revealed when negotiating positions were genuine versus strategic. Liralay's aerial capabilities allowed rapid communication between separated diplomatic sites. Thaxon and Zektar provided security that was visible enough to deter violence but restrained enough to avoid escalation. The peace they negotiated was not based on compromise or temporary truces, but on restructuring the entire situation so that conflict became counterproductive for all parties involved. They achieved this by identifying resource distribution patterns that made cooperation more profitable than warfare, then helping the alien species develop trade relationships that created economic incentives for peace. The 7th and final scenario was unlike anything any Academy cadet had ever faced. Squad 7 found themselves commanding an entire star system defense against an invasion fleet that outnumbered them by thousands to one. The scenario was designed to be mathematically impossible, a test of how leaders responded when faced with absolute certain defeat. Most military leaders in such situations would choose between fighting to the death for honor or surrendering to save lives. Both approaches accepted defeat as inevitable. Sarah chose a third option that no one had considered. She refused to accept that defeat was inevitable. Her analysis of the invasion fleet revealed patterns that suggested they were not dealing with a unified enemy force, but with a coalition of different alien species working together for various motives. Some wanted territory, others wanted resources, still others were seeking to eliminate perceived threats. The alliance was based on mutual benefit, not genuine cooperation. "We don't fight the invasion fleet," Sarah announced to her squad as they studied tactical displays showing impossible odds. "We make them fight each other." The strategy required intelligence gathering, psychological warfare, and diplomatic manipulation on a scale that pushed every member of the squad beyond their normal capabilities. Sarah used her understanding of the different alien psychology to craft communications that would exploit existing tensions within the invasion force, Scrix hacked enemy communication networks to plant false intelligence, suggesting that different fleet elements were planning to betray their allies. Nexus used harmonic resonance to amplify emotional responses that would make the planted intelligence more believable. Lirelay conducted reconnaissance missions that provided real intelligence about fleet dispositions while creating the appearance of military capabilities that didn't exist. Thaxon and Zektar led small-scale raids that were carefully designed to look like they came from different invasion fleet elements attacking each other. The raids were timed to coincide with the false intelligence, creating a pattern of evidence that supported the deception Sarah was orchestrating. The invasion fleet began to disintegrate as coalition members became convinced that their allies were planning to betray them. Instead of coordinated assault on the star system defenses, they found themselves fighting internal conflicts that escalated beyond anyone's ability to control. The invasion collapsed not because it was defeated by superior force, but because it destroyed itself through mistrust and paranoia. In the observation chamber, the assembled faculty watched the final scenario conclude with something approaching disbelief. Squad 7 had achieved victory in a situation designed to be impossible by redefining the fundamental nature of the conflict. Instead of trying to win a military battle they could not win, they had turned it into a political crisis that their enemies could not solve. Commander Vexus stood before the senior staff with an expression that mixed professional excitement with personal bewilderment. In 40 years of military service, I have never seen tactical innovation of this magnitude. This human has demonstrated capabilities that exceed anything in our training protocols. The Academy's evaluation protocols had no framework for assessing what Squad 7 had accomplished. They had not just succeeded at 7 impossible scenarios, they had redefined what success could look like in each situation. Sarah Chun had demonstrated that human tactical thinking operated on principles that went beyond conventional military doctrine, but more importantly, she had shown that diverse teams could achieve capabilities that exceeded the sum of their individual parts when led by someone who understood how to coordinate different strengths rather than impose uniform approaches. As the final evaluation ended and scores were calculated, Sarah found herself surrounded by squad members who looked at her with expressions ranging from amazement to profound respect. Thaxon, whose warrior culture prized individual combat prowess above all else, spoke for all of them. "Human Sarah," he said formally, "you have taught us that true strength comes not from claws or scales or wings, but from the ability to think beyond what others believe possible." The Vorthic Empire would be honored to fight beside such warriors. Similar sentiments came from each member of the squad. They had begun the evaluation as individuals from different species who happened to be assigned together. They were ending it as something unprecedented in galactic military history, a truly integrated mixed species unit that operated with efficiency that exceeded elite special forces. Sarah smiled as she looked at each of her teammates. We all brought something essential to these victories. But the most important thing we proved is that different doesn't mean inferior. Humans aren't weak because we don't have claws. Vorthak aren't stupid because they prefer direct action. Zephyrians aren't fragile because they prioritize grace. We're all just different approaches to solving problems. The evaluation results would be studied for generations as an example of what became possible when military thinking evolved beyond traditional species-specific doctrines. Squad 7 had achieved perfect scores on scenarios that no previous team had even completed successfully, but for Sarah Chun, the quiet girl who had endured months of mockery and dismissal, the real victory was simpler and more personal. She had proven to herself and to the galaxy that being different was not the same as being weak. And sometimes the things that made you different were exactly what made you strong. The Academy that had once dismissed her as too small and too quiet would graduate her as the highest scoring tactical innovator in institutional history. But more importantly, she had found her place among warriors who had learned that strength came in many forms, and that the greatest victories often belonged to those who refused to accept that defeat was inevitable. As Squad 7 left the evaluation center together, they carried with them something that would reshape military thinking throughout the galaxy, proof that the future of warfare belonged not to the strongest or the fastest, but to those who could think beyond the limitations that others accepted as unchangeable. The quiet girl had spoken, and the galaxy had listened.